Well, welcome everyone, and thank you so much for joining us at the last session of Rail Live 2024. I hope you've all had a fantastic time. I hope you've enjoyed the sunshine and the ice cream as well, and got lots of really valuable networking in too. I'm Daisy Chapman-Chamberlain. I am Innovation Manager at East West Rail, and in 2 weeks' time, I will be joining Transport for the North. Please do come and have a conversation with me if any of those things are of interest to you. But today, we're here to talk about a particularly pertinent question. Are the railways okay at the moment? Are they in crisis? What's going on? I've got an incredibly valuable expert panel with me to discuss that pretty broad-ranging question. So I'll hand over now to Andy to kick off our introductions.
I'll go first. So, look, just to introduce myself, Andy Bagnall, I'm the Chief Executive of Rail Partners. If you're not familiar with Rail Partners, we're a relatively new trade body. We represent owning groups, so the parent companies of the train operators, First, Arriva, Transport UK and so on, and also the freight operators. We do provide technical services to TOCs, train operators, public and private sectors, but we are very definitively the voice of the private sector operator in the railway. Just in terms of the question, then the discussion is the railway in crisis, discuss. I think the answer to that is that it is facing some very serious challenges and has been for a while, and perhaps some of the solutions that we need to address some of those challenges have been a while coming. But the big question is how do we solve them? How do we get the right challenges? We're obviously coming to the sort of tail end of a general election. The major parties have both got rail policies. I think it's fair to say that the railway doesn't really matter for the election. It's not a top order issue like the NHS or the economy, but the election really matters for the railway. So the two parties have got policies. The Conservatives set out in their manifesto that they would create Great British Railways, but as a public-private partnership. The Labour Party set out in their manifesto they would also create Great British Railways, but with an absolutely crucial difference, which is they would bring private sector operators back in-house when their contracts expire or if they breach them. And so there are some pretty fundamentally different conceptions of what the railway should look like, and the election will obviously looks, in the polls like a Labour victory, but the election will determine if Labour gets a chance to enact its solution, and we'll see if that works. Thanks, Daisy.
Thanks so much.
Thanks, Daisy, and hi, everyone. I'm Saida Gofran. I'm the Director of Engineering and Asset Management at Siemens Mobility. As you know, Siemens Mobility has got a proud heritage of manufacturing and maintaining trains and also providing rail infrastructure for the UK rail network. We have just opened a factory in Goole where we are producing new trains for TfL and hoping to win some new orders for future growth as well. And I think that ties into what Andy was saying earlier in terms of that long-term economic growth plan for the railway market. I think it's key that we get our suppliers on board and involve them in the sort of initial discussions around how we can leverage better manufacturing, better engineering, and move on to that digital journey for the railway, which will boost jobs and growth for the rail market.
Thank you so much.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Milda Manamaitite. I'm the Innovation Director at the Railway Industry Association, another trade body on a panel. We represent UK railway suppliers. And is railway in crisis? Well, I've just came back from a presentation and speech where Ukrainian railways were speaking. Now, that's a railway in crisis. I think UK railways are in limbo. With the indecision and hiatus, as a trade body, we always say, if you want an efficient railway, an efficient supply chain, and innovation, all you need is visibility of the work you're planning to do, commitment to do that work and stick to it, stick-to-itness, and a rolling program of that work to be delivered year on year, the boom and bust approach, the hiatus, the current situation we're in Purda and the past few years where there's so much indecision and maybe fear of decision that we are a bit of paralyzed. However, if you look today here, and as I said, I'm the innovation director, I represent the innovative companies and I talk to them, there's so much going on in that space. There's so many companies coming from other sectors looking to do business in railway. There's a lot of railway companies exporting their ideas to other countries. There are other operators looking to UK to learn from our experience. So what we need is to move on with some of those decisions and start investing, well, continue investing and release those funds to the supply chain so we can deliver better railway.
Amazing. Thank you both. And as you can see, we literally could not have a more perfect panel to discuss this question. So I want to kick off with where we are now before we start looking to the future. And we'll start with you, Milda. Where is rail currently? And I don't mean geographically. I mean, where are we in terms of the structure of the industry? Where are we in terms of how, obviously for your members, how the supply chain is operating? Are things positive, negative? What are your overall thoughts?
Okay. I joined Railway Industry Association at the beginning of CP6, and the conversations I've heard, it was like, oh, the devolution of Network Rail, all this change, you know, we really don't want the hiatus, this is unprecedented times. It has been unprecedented times every year since, and that movement of people, that constant reorganization, constant plans to change, of course, I understand we need to do something, we need to change, we need to evolve and adapt. But what we're seeing today, especially with our members, is really just a bit of a lost in a field kind of feeling. Who is doing what? Who is making decisions? We don't know. People are moving organizations. You're moving organizations, Daisy. You're part of the problem. But we now know where you're going.
I didn't expect to be attacked this early on.
Chair, Milda.
My good grief. Yeah, attacking the chair. Bad idea.
I like a good fight, you know that. So yeah, understanding who is making decisions, who has the power to invest and adopt innovation, that's what we're experiencing now. So through the Unlocking Innovation program that Railway Industry Association runs, it's a cross-sector initiative. We are trying to connect those dots. We're really going out there to routes and regions and different clients, and I'm looking forward to work with you in your new position, Daisy.
Well saved, thank you.
Yes, to really understand what the challenges these different regions and routes have, and how the supply chain, how those innovators can help and get into that route to market.
Absolutely, and I think it's fair to say probably on behalf of everyone that I do long for times to be precedented again. As you say, we've constantly been in an unprecedented state for probably the last 6 years, so tricky, especially for those supplying into the sector. Saida.
So I think we are still in the post-pandemic recovery phase where, you know, the operators saw a major dip in their revenues, and even though recovery has been positive in the last few years, we are still not quite there yet. I think there's a gap in the P&L for all the operators because inflation has pushed the cost up and the revenue has just not been able to, to offset the challenge that the operators have got. I was previously engineering director at ScotRail when the pandemic happened, and firsthand experienced the challenges in terms of keeping the staff employed, keeping the supply chain going, keeping the operations going. I think we are at the stage where it is stabilized, but from a supply chain perspective specifically, we want long-term stability, so we can invest in our factories, we can invest in our research and development, we can invest in new platforms to then be able to supply that continuous, rollout of whether it's new rolling stock, whether it's electrification, whether it's new digital products. And until we see that long-term sort of, 20, 25-year plan, which is joined up not just from a train operator perspective, but also from an infrastructure perspective, from an SME perspective, it's very difficult to stabilize and ask for that sort of investment. I mean, at Siemens, we are really, really keen to invest, more in the UK. We are obviously a global organization, and a lot of the different regions are asking for fundings for whether it's new platform development, whether it's battery trains, and we have committed to invest in the UK. That's why we have opened a factory in Goole. All of our manufacturing for UK train operators will be done here in the UK, and I think it will be great if we as an industry can come together and start those discussions with our customers, with our infrastructure provider, to come together and present that, the vision for the railway in the future and get the support from the government.
Yeah, exactly. And it's exactly as Milda said, again, it's that need for consistency, continuity and collaboration, and the kind of missing gap of those rolling programs for everything from, infrastructure through to rolling stock. Without those, there's no certainty. Without that certainty, investment is incredibly challenging.
there's a theme emerging, isn't there, I think, in what we've all said here about the need for a degree of long-term stability, but also that sense of stalled reform and a sort of waiting. By background, I'm a public policy professional. My background was in sort of politics. I'm a political animal rather than a railway animal. But I've been working rail for about 5 years. And I remember the exact date I started, which was the 20th of September 2018. And the reason I remember the exact day I started in the railway is because that is the day that the Glaister report into the failure of the May 18 timetable implementation was published. And what that report effectively said was rail needs root and branch sort of reform, overhaul for the first time since privatisation in the mid-90s, sort of generational reform. And since that date, 20th of September 2018, we've basically been waiting for that reform to happen, and we still are now. I sort of do hope that 2 weeks out from an election, hopefully we will get a very clear result, and whoever wins that, they will then sort of get on with implementing change. And so I think that sort of theme that we're all kind of saying is that this is an industry, certainly speaking for our members, so the private sector freight and passenger operators, that is crying out for change and kind of wants to get on with it, wants certainty of the direction of travel, whatever that is in some ways, that we can then plan against, as you say. I do think, though, it needs to be the right change. I've said that already. It's like going to the doctors. If they don't diagnose the symptoms correctly, they're very unlikely to prescribe you the right medicine. And so I do think we need to understand what are the drivers, what are the causes of some of the challenges we're facing on the railway if we're then going to get the right solutions. We had a system that was creaking prior to the pandemic. Accountabilities had got blurred. That's partly what led to that failure in May 2018 to implement the timetable. The pandemic obviously then, drove a freight train through the industry's finances, completely upended them. You've already heard, they're not back to where they were. A less visible impact of the pandemic, though, is that effectively it swept away the franchising system. So, to all intents and purposes, the system was renationalised in 2020. The NSO reclassified train operators as in the public sector, and that meant moving from the old franchise contracts to effectively management contracts where the Department for Transport takes all the cost risk. And that micromanagement that has been driven as a result of that contractual change is part of what's holding the railway back now. So it was exactly the right thing to do for the pandemic, the government standing behind the railway to keep the railway moving. But the over-involvement now of the Department for Transport, greater than at any point under the previous sort of nationalised era when we had British Rail, that is hampering operators looking out to the customer, looking at changed travel patterns post the pandemic and responding to that. So our argument is if we're going to get the right solutions for the railway, sort of just heaping all of the blame onto the private sector operator and believing, as some do, that if we remove that, all sort of ills will be cured, we don't think that stands up to scrutiny. We've got to really understand the problem, and then as we reform the system to address some of the weaknesses and some of the challenges of the pandemic, we try and preserve some of the strengths of the previous system as well.
I remember that timetable change. I remember very vividly. I tried for the first week or so to continue to travel and going to Manchester Victoria and the groans of the crowd and people just turning around and going home. That was the beginning of working from home for me. It wasn't COVID. It was the May 18 timetable
change. It was
change.
a failure to deliver the basic product of the railway, which is a reliable timetable.
Yeah, exactly. So we've talked a lot about where we are now. We've talked a lot about the challenging environment that we're working within. And then I think I'd like to look to the future, and we'll start with you for this one, Andy, is we know there are challenges in everything from basic delivery, rebuilding customer trust, rebuilding passenger numbers after COVID. We know there are challenges in freight, in innovation, in sustainability, in infrastructure, in cost. Where are the challenges not, But what are the opportunities? So let's think positively. Where are those key opportunities for us to build rail into the future of the UK? Looking at that kind of, the political climate is one thing, but for us specifically as an industry, where can we really make a difference?
Look, I think there are huge opportunities for the railway if we get it right. It's absolutely essential for economic growth, but also as a low-carbon form of transport, absolutely critical to sort of hitting our targets on net zero. I think we do have to get reforms right in order to sort of unlock some of those opportunities. For us, the right way to go forward is to take, if you like, a best of both worlds approach. So the private sector has actually been calling for greater public involvement since the Williams review that came out that May 2018 timetable failure. So in our submission to that, we call for a new public body, an arm's length body. Now both parties are calling that Great British Railways, but a structure that can join up track and train and give the railway much greater coherence to the customer. I think that's absolutely essential. For us, though, that public body should then harness private sector operation where it makes sense, where it can produce a better outcome for customers, freight customers and passengers than the public sector can deliver alone. And of course, that's the model which any of you have come from London. You already see the London Mayor, Sadiq Khan, a Labour Mayor using in Transport for London. It's sort of best of both worlds, public body, Transport for London, but then Arriva Trains runs the Overground, MTR runs the Elizabeth line. I think it's 28 different companies, private companies are involved in bus provision, but it still presents to the customer an absolutely seamless set of public transport solutions. So we think some of that learning can be applied nationally to get the best of both worlds. I do think you mentioned freight. So if I can, there are huge opportunities for freight particularly. Although there's quite a lot of political debate around passenger railway, there's actually a huge amount of consensus in the freight sector. So both parties, major parties, all three in fact, including the Liberal Democrats, have signed up to a growth target for freight. The government announced a sort of formal target in December last year of growing rail freight by 75% by 2050. We would like to see that sort of, be more ambitious, but it's a really good start. Giving a target helps to focus the whole system towards growing freight. That said, rail freight has a big challenge, which is the cost differential with road. We've had fuel duty held flat for 14 years at the same time as for passengers, fares going up above inflation, and for freight, access charges, cost of electricity rising. So we do need government to think across different modes holistically if we're going to really get that modal shift, get lorries off the road, HGVs off the motorway, and get more goods onto the railway. And that means the right sort of policy framework, thinking holistically, but it also means little bits of help which can address that cost differential. So the Freight Facilities Grant, the Mode Shift Revenue Support Grant, are those things that would just help companies which are looking at the cost of road and rail and thinking, well, road is just that little bit cheaper, just level that playing field a bit. And at the moment, that grant, the MSRS, is only 20 million quid. We've called for that to be doubled. It gets a return on investment of many multiples of every pound of taxpayers' money that is spent because of the environmental benefits. And also, and this is the point I never sort of stop banging on about, it's really beneficial to road users as well because it gets lorries off the motorway, which I'm sure everyone in the room has had that experience of being stuck behind traffic. So it's actually good for the road user as well as obviously being absolutely brilliant for the environment. 3/4 less carbon emissions from moving a ton of freight on rail. So sorry, I've rambled on, but huge opportunities on both the passenger side if we get reform right, but also critically on the freight side.
No, and I think it's a really interesting point. In particular, the need for consistency across the transport modes is something that's reflected in both in freight and in passenger. And I said this during a session yesterday as well. Rail is very guilty of being very insular. We really only like to talk to each other, and then sometimes not even to each other, only within our own organisation. And that's a problem. That insular nature means that we aren't looking at connected transport across freight. We aren't looking certainly at connected transport across passenger services, except as in your example, Andy, of course, TfL does that very well. So needing to look at that multimodal agenda, I think, is a really crucial opportunity into the future. And it's something certainly at East West Rail that we're looking at, door-to-door connectivity, provision of that kind of connected up bus service, and the public realm argument as well. We live in a system, we don't just, our responsibility it technically ends when someone leaves the station, but it doesn't physically end for them. And I think we need to keep that in mind. Saida.
I think the opportunities are huge, and Andy touched upon the sustainability agenda, and I think when we look at our ambition to achieve net zero in the transport industry, what we need to look at is that track and train solution, because we know electrification is expensive, but we have solutions where we can bring the track and train solution together with providing battery trains and discontinuous electrification, and getting the private sector to fund both and look that as an opportunity, because we have privately funded new rolling stock for decades, and it has been a very successful model in terms of getting that investment in, getting the customers the facilities on new trains, etc. Where we lack is that option on the infrastructure side. But what we are trying to do at Siemens, and you must have seen it in our recent press releases, etc., is we are modeling on, for example, TransPennine routes, Chiltern, Northern, ScotRail, how we can discontinually electrify some of these routes and provide the battery trains as an option to, take the diesel trains off the tracks, reduce the emissions, reduce the cost, and provide a better experience for our passengers. Because I think if you're talking about modal shift, and if you're talking about taking congestions and road vehicles and moving the passengers onto the trains, we need to be able to provide a credible, sustainable solution. We can't replace like for like and have a similar problem on our rail network. So I think there's a huge opportunity in transforming the railway and making it more integrated. Digitalization is, again, a huge opportunity. I think every industry is looking at artificial intelligence, digital projects, digital products. But what does it actually mean? I think it's all very fluffy words at the moment, and we really have an opportunity to integrate that in our railway industry in the way where we've got the data from our trains. We know how many passengers are being, the passenger loading information is there, the passenger information system information on the stations is there, is how do we make that seamless? How do we then integrate that to our rail ticketing reform, our passenger information flows? All of that creates so many opportunities, and for companies like Siemens, we want to offer that digital product as a service to our customers so that they see a seamless transition into when they have to buy a ticket, to when they get to the station, to when they board the train. All of that information is in their hands, on the phone, on the app, and they can make that conscious modal choice in terms of leaving their cars behind and moving on to the trains. But all of that is not easy. There are so many discrete parts in the railway which needs to come together and really buy into that agenda of connected transport. And I think if we can get that right, if we can get it right from the outset, I think that's going to create huge opportunities for everyone.
I think it's a fair point as well to make. We always talk about increasing passenger numbers. We always talk about building, more customers for rail freight. But we don't always, I think, really look internally and scrutinize, is the product we're offering actually the right product for these customers, for these passengers? Are we attractive enough as an industry? So I think it's about kind of having, yes, we need to be constantly pushing to build that, but as you say, we don't want them to have, it only takes one bad experience to alienate someone and push them back towards the car or towards another mode. So we need to make sure actually, as we're having the push to build numbers, at the same time, we need to make sure that we're doing that really, as you say, quite difficult internal work to have a more consistent product. Same time. Milda.
Okay, I'll talk a little bit, sort of a narrower view, specifically focusing what we as at RIA are doing to create that future opportunity, and it will touch on all of the things that have been mentioned. So speaking with the routes and regions of Network Rail and other regional, sort of national clients, we understand that weather resilience is a big opportunity for innovation, and that brings a lot of different parties, specifically if we look around data and digital, so that insight from data. If we want the infrastructure to be more weather resilient, what kind of data sources do we need to understand how the infrastructure is behaving in different weather conditions? Do we need to work with the Met Office? Do we need to work with the local farming community to understand how their behavior impacting the embankments of the track movement? And you've seen a lot of sensing devices at this show as well. But it is now the opportunity is to gather all these different data sources and understand, okay, what data do we have? What data do we missing? So we work very closely with Rail Data Marketplace, where you can, the main clients, the train operating companies, Network Rail, as well as suppliers and other clients are publishing their openly available data. As a supplier, you can publish your data as a commercial product as well, or you can download the data. And this is where we're also working together to understand the data wants. So if there's something you're working on and you say, oh, if only I could have this type of data, do come talk to me. We really want to start spreading the message and actually help you out collect and get that data. On the other side, that we're looking something within the innovation team at RIA and wider team is the passenger growth opportunity, which is around accessibility. And again, we've seen so many innovations for people with bad hearing or no hearing, bad vision or no vision, mobility, people with anxiety or neurodiversity. There's a lot of innovations out there for the market that is not currently using the system because it's not very pleasant experience to do so. You have to have somebody to guide you through the system. So how do we make the passengers independently travel the network, integrate with other transport modes through these innovations? What we'll be doing is we'll be collecting a bit of a catalog, a portfolio of innovations available today, and just start lobbying campaign about, hey, you know, if you want to improve passenger growth, here's a list of companies that do things that could make travel easier. So again, if you're working something around, and it's not just for passengers, by the way, it's for the workforce as well. So can we make the railways more accessible for the workforce? If you have something like this, please come talk to me. It would be great to understand. So these are just the very narrow type of opportunities, and just a little bit on investment side. Again, talking about these rolling programs, and of course we talk as a company about electrification, decarbonization, signaling, all these good things, but we're also wanting to understand investment around stations. So I don't know whether I'm giving away any secrets there, but my colleagues in the policy team will be looking around something, how can we do, and what the opportunities are around investing in stations, and not just the big stations, sort of a smaller stations as well.
I think that catalogue sounds fantastic, to be honest with you. One of the big issues we've got in rail, again, I think it's fair to say, we're constantly reinventing the wheel. Yeah. And it costs money. Every time we do that, we go back to square one, and there's absolutely no reason for it. We've got amazing solutions and suppliers in this country who have got innovations in pretty much every area you could possibly imagine. We need to have some consistency around actually, this is what's available, this is what we can utilise, save money. I mean, particularly from East West Rail perspective, we're spending the taxpayers' money. Save that, of course, is really vital, but also it means we can integrate and implement much faster rather than having to go back to square one.
It's a great exporting opportunity for companies outside UK saying, hey, you know, what we just heard is like, we don't know what UK has to offer. When you ask, hey, what kind of innovation you want, we don't know what you have. So actually saying, this is what we got. Bye.
Here's a list. The Department for Business and Trade will be very happy with you, Milda, I can say that. So my last question, and then I'm going to be opening up to the audience, so please do be thinking if you've got anything you'd like to ask our incredibly knowledgeable panellists. But it's a really straightforward one, and you can feel free to say yes or no. If you say no, you'll create some controversy, but why not?
Love that.
Does rail still matter in the UK? In this context and looking to the future, is it important? Milda?
I've got an answer for that, I'm itching. Have you been, show me your hands if you've been at Rail Life last year. Did you take the train to Rail Life last year? Okay, and I assume you had to drive or take a bus, and see what kind of difference that it makes. I am crying there is no rail service to Rail Life this year. I'm hoping it will improve. Railway matters. It just, I think that illustrates my point. I will not go any further.
Perfect, thank you. Very succinct.
Absolutely, and I'll answer it in a different way. I started my graduate position in ScotRail in 2010, and I've not left railway. I've been in the railway for the last 14 years, and every person that I have spoken to in my career have had that long-term railway career, because it creates a sense of community. It creates a sense of ownership and empowerment if you're working in the railway. From an engineering perspective, we know that there's a shortage of engineers in this country, but what the railway provides is an opportunity for our apprentices, our graduates, to really get involved in every aspect of the railway. I'm a mechanical engineer by degree, but I get involved in electrical projects and digital projects and software, everything. And that, from a career fulfillment point of view, it's been great. So I think as much as we talk about our customers and the communities that we connect, we also got to think about the jobs and the careers that the railway has to offer. And I think anybody who is currently working in the railway will hopefully agree with me that once you join the railway, you don't want to leave.
Yeah. When we talk about the railway family, it really is a true phrase. And I think sometimes we forget how rare that is. You don't get that in many industries. It is quite special.
Yep.
you'd sort of expect at Rail Live, wouldn't you, the question, does the railway matter, to get a certain amount of agreement from the panel? But look,
as I said, I'd love to get a no. I think it would really cause some controversy.
I'm afraid I'm going to disappoint. It's an absolute yes. And look, I've touched on this already. It's about the sort of role of the railway in driving wider economic activity, and also as a sustainable form of transport. I mean, in terms of the economy, just the impact it has of bringing people into sort of urban centres, connects people to jobs, it connects businesses to their customers. Obviously on the freight side, not everybody uses the railway as a passenger, but pretty much everybody one way or another is a customer of the railway in terms of freight. This is supermarkets getting goods to the shelves for us to buy them. It's transporting raw materials to power stations to keep the lights on. Rail is hugely important in a way that isn't always immediately visible in terms of the economy, but also critically that point about environmental sustainability. Rail freight, I've already used the stat, but it's worth repeating, 76% less carbon per tonne moved, moving it by rail on road. And of course, similar sort of stats apply in terms of carbon usage of using the train as a sustainable way of moving large numbers of people long distances relative to the car. So if we're going to have economic growth, which is, if you look at, again, the election debate that's going on, hugely important to getting the country sort of out of some of the economic difficulties it's facing, but also if we're going to make net zero, which we've set ourselves a legal target by 2050, the railway is an absolutely critical enabler of that.
Absolutely, it really does run through all of our communities. So, I'm going to open up to the audience. Do we have any questions? I think this gentleman at the front was first, and then we'll go over to the back. If you could say your name, where you're from, and then your question, please.
David Frankel, En Route Transport Campaign Group, and also a rail passenger in the north of England. Now, when I think about the words railway and crisis, and think about the last couple of years, TransPennine Express comes to mind. I think for a privatised system in general to work, you've got to have incentives. There should be rewards for success, and there should be consequences for failure. So with that said, and with a year of hindsight under our belts, do the panellists think it was the right decision to take TransPennine Express back into public ownership?
What an incredibly tricky question. Thank you so much for that. Andy, would you like to take that one?
I think that was coming my way. Look, I don't think it was the right answer, because I think TransPennine Express was facing a number of challenges, some of them common with public sector operator, private sector operators, but I think it was moving in the right direction at the point that it was taken back in-house. And I don't think what you've seen is just, a sort of a magic wand waved and then a sudden improvement. And I mean, it's been a while since I travelled on a TPE service, so you'll probably be a bit better judge of this. But the point is, it's not a magic bullet, simply bringing things back into the public sector. But the key, and I fundamentally agree with you on this point, there can't be rewards for failure. You have to have a system that incentivises private sector delivery in any of the interfaces that it sort of works with the public sector sort of oversight in the railway. And obviously colleagues on the panel have touched on that, whether it's the supply chain, whether it's independent retailers, rolling stock manufacturers, but most critically for the private operator. And that's why actually reform is so urgent. We need to update the contracts. And I sort of touched on this in my opening remarks. They were absolutely right for the pandemic, for the government just to step in and sort of take cost and revenue risk away from the private operator, just keep the railway running so, nurses and doctors could get to hospitals to deal with COVID. But that lack of incentive is actually creating the wrong behaviours. It creates a sort of an inward-looking railway that looks into the Department for Transport, having to go through bureaucratic sort of hoops, asking for permission to act, to deliver for customers, rather than doing the things that you can do if you have a sort of more great degree of commercial freedom and incentive for the operator to look outwards to the customer and just respond at the point of contact, people coming to station, getting on trains. So in that sense, we've got to get to a position where the system is outward-looking. And whatever happens in the election, if Labour does win, as it looks likely, and if they do decide, a public monopoly is the right way to go, that will be the question that sort of we will be asking on behalf of private sector operators. Well, okay, how are you going to incentivise the system to look outward and grow, rather than just sort of exhortation, which you can obviously do, TfL model that I've mentioned, if you harness the private operator.
Thank you, Andy. Just over at the back, please.
Hi, so Ruth Tank from Epion Consulting. We do change management and adoption, so it's a bit of a loaded question from me, but to what extent do you feel that the culture of the industry, the rail industry as a whole, helps not only identify opportunities for innovation, but then adopt them?
Milda?
Yes, we've experienced that. Speaking with our members, we've I've heard the same story from different members, happened in different countries as well with different clients, where the innovation is needed. It's agreed in the strategic leadership and working with suppliers. And when it comes to delivering the innovation to the teams that actually will have to use it, the answer is no. And I'm simplifying here to just illustrate the point, because what we've heard is saying my team is currently being paid to go and maybe find and fix faults if we implement this preventative maintenance solution. Before we figure out what to do with the team, what do I do with the team? Do they just lose the jobs? And on the other hand, we have skill shortage. So there is a little bit of a disconnect between the sort of strategic thinking and vision and plans and investment to sort of what's actually happening day to day on the railway. And I think we can do two things. First, making sure empowering the people who work on the railway every day to understand, to make sure that they are heard about the problems, and ask them what the problems, how can we solve the problem with innovation, and sort of them be part of the solution. And there is a little bit of organizational change needed. So how do we adopt a technology, a solution that will change the nature of the work of the team, but we can do this simultaneously. So thinking about that together with the solution as well. So the culture does need to adopt and change.
Saida, did you want to come in on that from a Siemens perspective?
I think we are constantly trying to, innovate and launch products which provide that sort of innovation and fresh look. The problem that we face is, from a technical perspective, obviously we have to go through certain compliance sort of processes in the railway industry which are very stringent, and for good reasons. You have to comply with the safety standards, with the regulations, with the legislation. But it's how do we involve all the right decision makers right from the outset to then allow for accelerated decision making, because sometimes it takes, we've all sat in design reviews which takes years to come to a conclusion with regards to compliance with the legislations and the standards. And I think that there's an opportunity there to do something different to make things easier and quicker to implement the new solutions.
Thank you. Andy?
So it's another sort of indicator of the need for a decentralised system. I think it's very, very hard to specify innovation in an overly centralised system. Also, again, it's about getting the right balance of public and private sectors in running the railway is important. Again, the public sector tends to be, not always, but tends to be more risk averse in innovation. So again, creating the sort of competitive moment through a competitive tendering process. Also, by having the right framework for open access, that's how you inject the moments into the system where you're most likely to get innovation. And so I say that sort of unashamedly, a monolithic sort of approach to a railway has consequences, not just, of course, for our members, the private sector operators, but also actually, I think, for the supply chain as well. So there's a collective interest in getting that balance right to drive innovation in.
Thank you. Anything else from the audience? I think this gentleman was first, and then we'll go over there. Becky didn't even see you. You're third.
Oh. Hello. Yep, there you go. My name is Ronan. I'm from Chiltern Railways. I'm the performance manager. So obviously, currently, there's quite a demoralised workforce. You talk about customer touch points. You can create a digital journey, but actually, who's going to accompany the customer on that digital journey? If you have a demoralised workforce, and you see it in certain industries, and on the railway especially, that will impact how that customer feels when they're travelling. And how can that be put at the forefront when also you need to invest in the infrastructure and all those other innovative programs, when actually, if the staff aren't happy, and we talk about not willing to adopt them, if they're not happy, they aren't going to be willing to adopt them. So how do you actually turn that around and get, actually, you're going to lead this and let's change this industry for the better?
You need a pizza party. Just a pizza party. That's how you deal with demoralized staff.
That's the solution. You heard it here first, folks. Pizza party will fix the railways.
Yeah. No, but it is a very, very crucial point. And I think when I say, you need a pizza party, is to illustrate a point, is to actually, without trying to kind of put a plaster to a problem, but really to understand why the workforce is demoralized. Is it the pay? Is it the working conditions? Is it the nature of the work? Is it training? Is it management? There could be a variety of reasons why. And it's willingness to really understand the issues and take some measures without throwing a bit of a, hey, you know, well, that's what you need, just a little bit of a team building afternoon. And I would like to ask you the question, where do you think the problem is? Why? What would help your colleagues to be more excited and enthusiastic about coming to work?
So I think the problem on the rail industry at the moment, coming from pre-COVID. So previously, I worked in the airline industry and I came to the railway during COVID, and I was one of the fortunate people that came over and have decided to stay. You see, it's about this policy reform. We have been told, since I joined the railway mid-COVID, there's a reform coming. I remember working at EasyJet, and if something's going to change, at the beginning of the year, this is what we're doing as a business. By the end of the year, that was in place. On the railway, people have been promising, and what have we delivered as an industry since COVID? Yes, passenger numbers have gone up, but that's mainly just because people need to get to places now. But what can we say as an industry we've delivered? And actually, that then goes on to the colleague going, well, actually, we get people from A to B, but what have we done?
Do I matter?
That is really good, yeah.
Interesting.
I absolutely think we've got to get on with reform. I mean, we've all said that from the panel, and I sort of say that anecdote of how long I've been working the railway, and like you, waiting for the reforms to come the whole time. It's always just around the corner. So hopefully the election produce a result that then we push ahead with reform. And I think, in some ways, just having clarity of direction will solve a big chunk of the initial problem to then sort of get over that inertia. I do also think, and I think this directly sort of relates to staff morale, I do think we've got to resolve the industrial action that we're currently experiencing. It's the most prolonged period, I think, ever. My history is not perfect on the railway, but 2 years, a very, very long time. We've got to find a way with the new government to unlock that. Nobody wins from industrial action. Staff don't win. It's demoralising. Nobody wants to be on strike and losing pay. The industry doesn't win. It loses revenue, which further exacerbates some of the difficulties. But most importantly, customers lose out from it, and people are deserting the railway because we just can't provide a sort of reliable service. And there are wider issues than just industrial action underpinning that. But we've got to get that resolved to then actually come together as an industry as a whole, supply chain, operators, Network Rail, and try and sort of drive some of that reform through. I think that's absolutely essential.
We had a question over here. Just behind you.
Hello, I'm Ronnie. I'm a graduate engineer with Atkins Reales. First of all, thank you for sharing your thoughts on our railway in crisis. My question is, how can we make our rail travel more affordable and also with less disruptions? Thank you.
Oh, it's just a small question then. How do you make it affordable and less disruptive? Who'd like to come in?
You're looking at me. I don't want to monopolise. Go on, you.
So, did you want to come in?
So I think costs, is a major challenge in the railway, whether it's the operator, whether it's supply chain, whether it's infrastructure. And it's not about cutting cost, but it's making efficiencies within the system. So there's a lot of duplication. If you look at reliability management or performance management, Network Rail does that, operators do that, suppliers does that. And can we move to a better, efficient way of managing reliability? Because at the end of the day, what the customer cares about is my train on time? Is my train going to leave the station, the same platform, all that stuff. So we need to look at costs from an efficiency point of view. We need to really harness digital opportunities and digital technologies. And again, it's not about, cutting jobs and making things more digitalized, but it's adding more value-added activities for whether it's providing customer services, whether it's providing maintenance on our assets, whether it's fleet or infrastructure. And then looking at the opportunities for growth as well, because we have to spend money to save money, and I think that's something that we struggle in the railway. We are always looking for short-term measures to say, what can we do in this control period, or what can we do in this franchise to reduce our cost? But railway is going to be here for another 100 years, hopefully. So we need to have a long-term, sustainable, revenue-generating, efficient plan, and hopefully that can then relate into the affordable tickets for our customers at the end of the day.
I do want to make sure that we've got 2 more questions. If you'd like to discuss that with our panel afterwards, please do feel free to come and grab them as well, because it's obviously a very interesting and meaty topic, I think it's fair to say. We had a question just over here from this gentleman, and then I'll come to you.
Thanks. My question is linked actually to the last one and some of the comments. Andy, you mentioned the policy for UK growth. I've forgotten Saida, you mentioned production in the UK based up in Goole. And I'm interested in terms of what each of you think you could do to support the medium to long-term plan that will galvanise the railway in a line that supports UK growth and therefore would have political backing. For me, I see lots of innovation. You mentioned innovation and export. But it's in small pockets, and small pockets are procured often in terms of a short-term, this is what we require for this project, as opposed to long-term or medium-term aspirations for improvement in the cost base.
If you'd like to take that.
I can quickly answer that. So what we're actually, this is our bread and butter. RIA does this every day. And what we do is understanding the issues that the supply chain is having, and then speaking about those issues with an amplified voice. So we work very closely with the biggest clients, the government. You know, we're constantly there, whispering, shouting, whatever the voice we need to use about the way we can support the long-term growth, whether that's, you know, rolling pipelines, early contractor engagement, boom and bust, no hiatus. We have these, you know, out of the pocket, and we're always trying to also come up with some solutions. So we're working with incoming governments, outgoing governments, and just saying, so actually the best thing what you could do is to tell us, because then we will pass the message.
Did you have a brief perspective?
Yeah, no, very brief. I know you want to get the last question in. Look, really quickly, on the passenger side, it's contractual reform and fares reform to, again, that point I made earlier, to allow the system to point outwards to customers, respond to their needs, and hopefully give them a more attractive offer and the sense that they're getting value for money for their ticket price. On the freight side, is that growth target that I mentioned earlier, and then aligning the policy framework to support that growth target. And I think if you did that, and we've sort of all touched on this in different ways, if you have certainty of the framework, you will get private sector investment. It needs clarity on the direction in order to invest against that, to make the cases to sort of boards and shareholders.
Thank you. And then we'll take the final question.
Hi, Andy Scott here from Oaklands Rail. I think the railway fundamentally has a cost problem. It's perceived as being unaffordable to governments, and people don't like paying the prices they're being asked for to travel on the railway, and so on and so forth. I went to an innovation conference by the DFT last autumn, and I listened to 33 different presentations on innovative ideas. I would say 90% of them were around data, software, applications. There were very few that were really about changing the cost of running the railway. Siemens's discontinuous electrification was one of them. But I wonder if the panel thinks there needs to be more focus on how do we get signalling less expensive? How do we get track renewal less expensive? I could go on.
Take one brief answer on that. Who wants to jump on it?
I'll jump in. We have a lot of our members working on exactly that, and this is one of the, when we speak with the railway clients and say, okay, what are your challenges? Cost efficiency and reducing costs is absolutely always featuring in the top three things. And there's quite a lot of solutions, whether it's signaling or decarbonization or data or actually materials, all of that. The cost efficiency is at the top, and that is sometimes using off-the-shelf products instead of reinventing the wheel. It is pipeline of work. So if we have pipeline rolling programs, that it reduces the costs. And it is not canceling projects last minute, because then you have to retrain your staff. So the reducing the cost is something that we talk about constantly.
Wonderful. Thank you, Milda. And that's the end of our panel for today. I hope you've all enjoyed Rail Live 2024. I hope to see you all here next year. And can we please have a round of applause for the panel? Thank you.